I'm Elise Warren. I'm 35 years old. I design book covers for a living. And last spring I was told by my own mother that I wasn't invited to my younger brother's wedding. She didn't whisper it. She didn't say it in private. She said it to my face just a few feet from the entrance to the reception, while 2 catering staff and a wedding coordinator looked on in awkward silence. Strangers aren't allowed, she said, with that same faint smirk she used to give me when I came home from college and dared to talk about my career. I was wearing the dress I had spent 2 weeks choosing. I was holding a leather-bound guest book I'd designed by hand, 40 hours of work etched into every stroke of the gold foil lettering. And yet when I stepped forward and calmly gave my name, the young man holding the iPad looked at me with confusion and concern. "Sorry, your name isn't on the list," I blinked. "Could you check again, Elise Warren? I'm the groom's sister." He checked, then again, then looked over his shoulder and called for the coordinator. That's when my mother walked over in her navy gown and pearls, untouched by the midday heat or human decency. "Did you really think you were invited?" she said, her voice as smooth and steady as ever. "Strangers aren't allowed," I smiled. Not because I was calm, but because something inside me broke so cleanly in that moment. It felt like the last piece of me trying to earn her love finally snapped off and floated away. "Then I'll live like a stranger," I said quietly. I handed the guest book to the stunned coordinator and turned away, heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks on the end of a sentence I didn't get to write. But what they didn't know was this: I had just withdrawn the printing license. The signage, the menus, the bar cards, the seating charts. Every piece of design I had created for their precious wedding was protected by law. And I wasn't bluffing. While I sat alone on a stone bench near the garden, listening to the faint sound of vows being exchanged just beyond the hedge, my mother's phone began to ring. First once, then again, then 5 times in less than 2 minutes. The bar had no menu. The seating chart was gone. The projector was blank. And the slideshow still in my Dropbox. That wedding didn't just fall apart. It unraveled quietly, awkwardly, and completely like a dress with a hidden tear no one noticed until it was already on the runway. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just walked away. Because when someone calls you a stranger, they're not taking away your name. They're giving you permission to stop pretending you still belong. And I was done pretending. Let me take you back before the ruined wedding, before the legal notice, before the guest list that didn't include me. Let me tell you how I got there, what I did in return, and why in the end I didn't need to crash a wedding to reclaim my seat at the table. Because some stories don't start with vengeance. They start with silence and end with clarity. I didn't cry. Not when the planner looked at me with pity. Not when the staff awkwardly turned away. Not even when my mother's words, "strangers aren't allowed," kept echoing in my ears like a loop of bad music I couldn't turn off. I just walked, step by step, away from the people who shared my last name, but no longer my story. The reception was beginning behind me. I could hear laughter and champagne corks, the gentle clink of glasses, and the opening notes of an instrumental version of "At Last." It wasn't meant to be ironic, but it was. I walked past rows of parked cars and stepped onto the edge of the lawn, my heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. There was a bench under a sycamore tree, not part of the venue, just something left over from a park that bordered the country club. I sat. I adjusted my dress so it wouldn't wrinkle, even though I had nowhere to go afterward. My hands trembled in my lap. I pressed them down against my thighs to keep still, but the inside of me wasn't still. It felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything warm and left only cold air and splinters. I looked down at my shoes, pale blue satin. They were starting to pinch. Funny the things you notice when your family decides you no longer count. I leaned back and stared up into the tree's branches. The wind moved through them like it knew better than to interrupt. That's when the memories started creeping in, not loud or dramatic, just persistent. 18 years old. The birthday party that never happened. I'd spent all week pretending it didn't matter. I'm not really into birthdays, I'd told my friends, but deep down I was hoping. Maybe a surprise dinner, maybe a cake, maybe just a card on the kitchen counter. When I came home, there was nothing. Just a note on the fridge that read, "Gone to Darren's soccer game. Heat something up if you're hungry." Then college graduation. Everyone else's parents wore proud smiles, carried flowers, balloons. I scanned the crowd for my mother. When she arrived 20 minutes late, she looked irritated and sat 3 rows back. Later, she said the traffic was ridiculous. Anyway, it's not like you're going to be a real artist. I'd stored those moments in some emotional attic, filed under forget, move on, don't take it personally. But they didn't stay put. They came flooding down now, uninvited, like guests at a wedding no one asked for. I thought about the guest book I had left at the check-in table, the leather cover, the gold foil, the stitched corners. My fingertips still remembered the texture. I had made it hoping they would write kind things, hoping my name would be printed inside, hoping I mattered, but I didn't, not to them. A gust of wind carried a faint echo of applause from the ceremony. Someone was being announced, Mr. and Mrs. Darren Warren. The crowd cheered, and I sat on a park bench under a tree I didn't plant in shoes that no longer fit, holding a silence no one else could hear. Still, I didn't cry, because crying would mean I hadn't seen it coming. But I had, not all at once, but piece by piece. And now the final piece had been placed. The picture was complete. I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. And from that erasure something new could begin, something entirely mine. We grew up in Spokane in a house with olive green shutters and a slanted front porch that always needed repainting. Our backyard had a tire swing that hung from a walnut tree, and every spring crocuses poked up through the grass as if testing the weather. I was 5 when I realized my mother liked Darren more. I didn't have the vocabulary for it yet, but I felt it. In how she laughed longer at his jokes. In how she ruffled his hair when he spilled juice, but scolded me when I dropped a fork. He was younger by 2 years, smaller, clumsier. But to her, he was magic. I was quiet, obsessed with books and sketching in spiral-bound notebooks. When other girls played house or hopscotch, I was drawing roof lines and trees from memory. I thought if I was excellent enough, it would balance the scale. I entered every art contest at school. I won most of them. My dad, before he passed, would frame my ribbons and tape my drawings to his office wall. But Mom, she once said, "That's nice, Elise, but Darren has real charm. He doesn't even have to try." I pretended to laugh, but that sentence followed me for years. I remember one Saturday when I was 10, I had spent a full week painting a picture of our house from the sidewalk, the garden, the chipped porch, even the curtains in Darren's window. I gave it to her as a gift for Mother's Day. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Why did you paint the paint peeling?" I said, "Because that's what it looks like." She smiled tightly. Some things don't need to be so realistic. She never framed it, never hung it. She folded it in half and put it in a drawer. That was the first time I understood my honesty didn't match her version of love. Darren gave her macaroni hearts glued to paper. I gave her a mirror, and she didn't want to look. Over the years I learned to expect less, but part of me still hoped. It's strange how long a hope like that can live even when you've stopped feeding it. I moved to New York for college and never really came back. I found work as a junior designer in a small publishing house, then slowly carved out a niche designing covers for indie novels. It was quiet work, solitary, but it paid enough, and it made sense to me in ways people often didn't. I rented a studio in Brooklyn with windows that rattled during thunderstorms and a radiator that hissed like it held secrets. I painted on weekends. I read voraciously. I went on a few dates that didn't go anywhere, and I was fine with that. I called home every Sunday. I sent gifts for birthdays, anniversaries, Mother's Day. I tried. But with each year, the responses grew thinner. Shorter calls, one-word replies. Sometimes no reply at all. I began noticing that when Darren posted family photos, barbecues, holiday celebrations, I was never in them. Not even mentioned in the captions. And then came the post that confirmed what I had quietly feared. It was a photo of Darren and a woman I didn't know holding hands at a vineyard. The caption read, "She said yes." Champagne emojis, heart emojis. Over 200 comments. I wasn't tagged. I hadn't even known he was dating anyone seriously. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not angry, not hurt, just displaced. Like I'd left a room thinking I'd be missed only to return and find the door locked behind me. When I texted him congratulations, he replied, "Thanks, Elise. Hope you're well." That was it. "No, we'll call soon." "No, can't wait to introduce you." Just a breezy PR-friendly sentence from a brother I used to build pillow forts with. That night, I opened my old sketchbook, the one I used when I was 13. Inside was a drawing of our house again, this time in winter. No people, just light in one window. I remember I used to tell myself that was my room, that no matter what happened, as long as that window was lit, someone in the house remembered me. But the house had changed, and the light was off. The first time I met Chelsea was at a small engagement dinner held at a rented event room downtown. Just family and a few of Darren's friends, my mother had said. As though I needed reassurance, I wouldn't be overwhelmed by strangers. I arrived on time, gift in hand. A watercolor painting, small and carefully framed our childhood farmhouse in Spokane. I'd painted it from memory. The front porch light was left glowing the same way I always imagined it, when I felt far from home. Chelsea took it from me with a quick thank you and placed it still wrapped on a side table with the unopened wine bottles. My mother glanced at it and said, "That's interesting," before turning back to a conversation about flower arrangements. Darren hugged me briefly like an afterthought, then excused himself to help his fiancée with something in the kitchen. I stood in that room for 20 minutes. No one introduced me to anyone. I poured my own sparkling water and watched as people gathered around my mother and Chelsea, smiling, chatting, belonging. I've never been good at inserting myself into circles that won't shift to let me in, so I didn't. I watched. I listened. At one point, my mother turned to someone and said, "Well, Darren's really the heart of this family. Always has been." And Chelsea laughed as if she already knew. I wasn't angry, just aware. I was present, yes, but I was not included. A week after the dinner, Darren called. "Hey," he said, "Chelsea and I were talking. Would you want to design the invitations?" I hesitated just long enough for him to add, "Of course, only if you have the time." Of course I had the time. I said yes. Not because I was eager to work for free, but because for a moment I believed this was my opening, my way back in. If I created something beautiful, something they couldn't ignore, maybe they'd see me again. Not just the sister who moved away, but someone worth calling, including thanking. I threw myself into the project, spent late nights adjusting fonts, testing paper textures, painting soft floral borders by hand. Chelsea wanted something elegant but personal. Darren wanted nothing too fussy. My mother, in her usual tone, said, "Well, just don't make it look like a book cover." Maylin, their planner, was the only one who treated me like a professional. She sent organized briefs, gave specific feedback, and signed every email with "Thank you for your care." I held on to that sentence like a lifeline. The first proof I sent came back with a note from Chelsea. "Can the pink be less pink?" The second round, Darren thinks the script font looks too old-fashioned. By the fourth round, I'd created an entirely new layout, sleek, clean, subtle elegance. Still, Mom asked, "Are you sure this is good enough for a printed suite?" "It's not just an email, you know." I smiled through clenched teeth and told her I was confident. I delivered digital proofs, mock-ups, and eventually production-ready files. I even coordinated with a specialty printer in Portland for foil stamping and embossing. No charge, I just wanted it done right. The week the invitations shipped, I texted Darren. "Everything's gone out. Let me know if you need anything else." He replied, "Appreciate it." Chelsea says they look great. That was it. No phone call, no thank you note, not even a mailed copy of the finished product. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. The work was my voice. They'd heard it. Surely now I was part of this. Surely. It was a Monday morning when Maylin called. I remember because I had just finished reviewing a set of cover proofs and was making tea chamomile like Rachel always suggested when I seemed tense. "Elise," Maylin said, her voice careful, "I wanted to run something by you." The final RSVP list came in today from Patricia. I was double-checking a few names, and I didn't see yours. I blinked. "What do you mean? I assumed you were attending, obviously, but your name's not on the list. Anywhere." I sat down slowly, holding the mug against my palms. "It's probably just an oversight." "That's what I thought," she said gently. "But I wanted to let you know in case it needed correcting." "Thank you," I told her. "I'll ask Darren." I sent him an email that night. The subject line was neutral, quick guest list check, and the body even more so. "Hey, Maylin mentioned the RSVP list didn't include me. I'm sure that's a simple mistake, but just wanted to flag it for you. Let me know if I should follow up with her directly." I added a smiley face at the end. 3 days passed. No reply. I followed up once more, this time via text. Just a polite nudge, "Let me know about the guest list. Happy to confirm anything Maylin needs. Thanks, nothing. By the end of the week, my inbox was still silent. I kept telling myself it was wedding chaos, that he was busy, that these things slipped through the cracks, that maybe they were planning something special and didn't want to spoil a surprise. Then on Sunday afternoon, I received a message from my mother. It was one line. Elise, let's not complicate things. This is Darren's moment. Best if you sit this one out. No greeting, no punctuation beyond that one period, no explanation. I read it once, then again, and again. And then I set my phone down and stared out the window. It wasn't a mistake. They hadn't forgotten to add me. They had chosen not to. And that more than any insult, more than any oversight, was the thing that sank deepest. Because it was so quiet, so clean. It wasn't a fight. It was an erasure. I didn't respond. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't try to negotiate my presence like some door-to-door vendor begging for a moment of someone's time. Instead, I opened my laptop, and I emailed Rachel. Rachel Hughes lived 2 doors down from me in Brooklyn. We met 3 years earlier when her cat climbed through my fire escape and fell asleep on my windowsill. She apologized with a bottle of Pinot Noir and a business card that read, "Family Law Estate Mediation Boundaries Enforced and Advised." When I knocked on her door that Tuesday, she opened it with no questions, just a nod and a chamomile. Okay, I nodded, and she led me into her apartment, warm, minimalist, full of books that looked well-loved and often referenced. I told her everything, from the dinner party where Chelsea left my painting unopened to the text from my mother that said I shouldn't make things complicated. Rachel didn't take notes. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, arms crossed gently over her linen shirt eyes, alert but kind. When I finished, she set her mug down and said, "Did you sign any kind of work for hire agreement?" "No, just emails. Did they pay you anything?" I shook my head. "I did it as a gift." "But you never explicitly said it was a transfer of rights?" "No," she leaned back. "Then everything you created, invitation design, signage, layout, table cards, is legally yours. You own the intellectual property. If they want to use it without your permission, that's infringement." I sat there for a moment, letting that settle. "I'm not trying to ruin the wedding," I said. "I know," she replied. "But this isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries. They erased you, Elise, but they're still using what you built to celebrate themselves. That's not just offensive, it's legally wrong." She was right. It wasn't about making them pay. It was about making them stop pretending I didn't exist while benefiting from everything I gave. Rachel drafted the letter that night. A cease and desist. Direct, polite, and surgically clear. To the family of Darren and Chelsea Warren. This notice serves to inform you that all design materials provided by Elise Warren for the wedding of Darren Warren and Chelsea Nolan are the legal intellectual property of the creator. Without written and signed agreement of transfer or usage license, you are not authorized to reproduce, display, or distribute said materials in print or digital form. Please remove all instances of said designs from planned publication or usage. Failure to comply will result in further legal action. Sincerely, Rachel Hughes. Esquix. I read it 3 times before signing my name at the bottom. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary, like placing a lock on a door that had been wide open for too long. We sent the letter by email and certified mail 2 days before the wedding. No response, no threat, no apology, just silence, which for my family was the loudest confirmation of all. I wasn't planning to go. The cease and desist had been sent. The silence afterward was louder than any answer. And I had made peace with the fact that this wedding, this family had no place for me. Then Mei Lin called. It was the night before the ceremony. I almost didn't answer. "Elise," she said gently, "I know this is strange, but I need your help." I didn't say anything, I just listened. "If you're not there tomorrow, I won't have anyone to double-check the signage or the menu placement. Darren didn't save the files correctly, and Chelsea's cousin is trying to step in, but she doesn't know what goes where. I'm sorry, I know this puts you in an unfair position." Her voice wavered. Not dramatic, just tired. I took a breath. "I'll come for the setup," I said, "but I'm not staying." "Understood," she said quietly. "Thank you." I didn't sleep much that night. I packed what I called my emergency kit, extra copies of the table cards, printed menus, a glue stick, scissors, white ribbon. I added tissues, breath mints, and 2 bandages just in case. It was muscle memory at that point. The next morning, I dressed the same as before. Pale blue dress, the same heels, the same soft hope tucked somewhere beneath the weight of clarity. When I arrived at the venue, I parked in the furthest row. I walked past the florists, unloading peonies and eucalyptus, the string quartet tuning quietly beneath a white tent. And then I reached the main entrance. A young man stood there, tablet in hand. "Hi there," he said. "Name please, Elise Warren." He tapped, scrolled, then frowned. "I'm sorry. I don't see that name." I waited. He checked again, then glanced at the ballroom doors. "Let me get someone." I already knew what was coming, but I stayed still. Vanessa, the coordinator, came quickly. Her face was professional, but uneasy. "I think there's been a miscommunication," she said, already glancing inside. "Do you mind waiting just a moment?" And then, of course, my mother appeared. She wore navy silk, a string of pearls, and an expression carved from glass. "Elise," she said calmly. "What are you doing here?" "I came to help Maylene," I replied. She asked. My mother tilted her head. "You really thought showing up after the letter was a good idea?" I said nothing. She took a breath, then looked past me as if addressing the air. "Did you really think you were invited? Strangers aren't allowed." The same sentence, same inflection, same smirk just beneath the surface. I smiled. Not from warmth, from recognition. "Then I'll live like a stranger." I set the guest book still wrapped in tissue on the table beside the seating chart, and I walked away. Behind me, I heard the music swell. Doors opened. Laughter bubbled up like champagne, but none of it belonged to me. And for the first time, I was okay with that. I placed the guest book on the check-in table as gently as if it were made of glass. The leather was soft dark brown, with the couple's initials embossed in gold foil. I had stitched the binding by hand. It was supposed to be passed from table to table during the reception pages, filled with warm wishes and shaky signatures, a keepsake for years to come. But now it sat untouched, unread, and unneeded. I turned and walked back across the stone walkway heels, clicking in rhythm with the string quartet's opening song. Can't help falling in love. Of course. I found the same bench as before tucked beneath the sycamore tree near the edge of the property. I didn't need to see the ceremony to know what was happening. I could feel it in the tempo of the music, in the whoops and polite applause, in the carefully orchestrated joy echoing across the lawn. And then a different sound broke through. A phone. Vibrating, then ringing. Sharp, insistent. I didn't have to see it to know whose it was. I imagined my mother standing near the bridesmaids, one hand clutching her purse, the other reaching for the phone she never let out of sight. I imagined the look of quiet annoyance on her face, the forced smile as she stepped aside to take the call. Then another ring, a different tone, another phone, another message. The strings kept playing, but the tension underneath had shifted. Something was off. And then Maylin appeared at the edge of the lawn, her heels sinking slightly into the grass, one hand pressed to her earpiece, the other gripping a clipboard so tightly the paper looked creased from knuckle to corner. She scanned the guests, then the tent, then the outdoor bar. I didn't move. I knew what she was looking for. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message. From Maylin, "Is there a backup copy of the signage files? The printer says your cease and desist forced them to halt delivery. Nothing's arrived. The bar menus are missing. The slideshow didn't load. The seating chart is gone. Please advise." I read it once, then once more. I didn't reply, not to be cruel, but because there was nothing left to say. This was not a sabotage. This was simply a boundary being respected by law and by consequence. They had made a choice. So had I. The wedding went on, but not smoothly. I could hear the ripple effect, the coordinator calling names that didn't match any printed cards, the bartender shouting drink options, the murmur of confusion as guests wandered past blank easels and unlit screens. Someone asked about the slideshow. I imagined Darren pulling out his phone and realizing he didn't have the file, that Chelsea's cousin didn't have the right version, that no one thought to ask me before they stopped answering. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat, letting the weight of it pass over me, not through me. I thought about Chelsea, about her holding back tears because nothing matched the mood board, about the photographer struggling to make chaos look curated, about my mother not able to fix it, not able to spin it. For once there were no quick explanations, only silence, only lack, only the absence of what they had taken for granted. And I had never felt more present, not in the room, but in the aftermath. That night, as Spokane's autumn gave its first whisper of snow, I went for a walk. The kind of walk where you don't bring music. You don't bring gloves. You just go hands in your pockets listening to your own breath and the world forgetting to make noise. It was close to midnight. The wedding would have been winding down bouquet-tossed speeches, slurred cake sliced and forgotten. My phone buzzed in my coat. I stopped under a street lamp. The light was soft, almost shy. My breath formed clouds. From Darren Elise. I know things got messy. Chelsea is in tears. Could you please resend the files? We'll pay you for everything. Name your price. I didn't open the message again. Didn't stare at the words like I had Mom's. Didn't analyze the punctuation. Didn't wonder if Chelsea had asked him to send it. I just stood there letting the cold settle into my fingertips. It wasn't anger I felt, not pity either, just a wide, strange silence like when a bookshelf falls over and the dust hasn't landed yet. I turned my phone face down in my pocket and kept walking. The sidewalks were mostly clear, but snow collected gently on the hedges and mailbox tops. Christmas lights had already started appearing on porches too early in my opinion, but something about their glow softened the quiet. I thought about the way Mom had looked at me earlier that day. Not furious, not even cold, just removed. Like she'd turned a dial in her mind and moved me into a different category. Not daughter, not guest, just space. Strangers aren't allowed. That sentence had curled around my ribs and nested there. It wasn't the words, it was the ease, the fluency with which she said them, like she'd rehearsed, like she had always believed it. And now I did too. I used to wonder what would be enough. A better job, a better haircut, a louder voice at family dinners. But there had never been space for me at that table, not really. I passed the elementary school where Darren and I used to wait for Mom in the carpool lane. He always got shotgun. I always sat behind her. Even then I had a view of her neck, not her face. I wondered if she ever turned around. The street sloped downhill toward a bakery that closed early but always smelled like cinnamon if you walked past the back door. I stopped there, let the smell fill my lungs. Let it remind me that not everything forgotten is gone. Some things are just misplaced. But not me. I wasn't lost. I wasn't missing. I just wasn't where they wanted me. And that was no longer my problem to fix. 3 months later, I unlocked the front door of my studio for the first time. It was small, 2 rooms and a kitchenette tucked above a wine shop, but it smelled like lemon oil and fresh paper. The walls were still bare, the shelves mostly empty, but the sunlight spilled through the tall windows like a promise. I had painted the door myself soft gray with my name in crisp serif gold. Warren & Co. Book Design Studio. The Co didn't stand for anyone yet, but it felt hopeful. Like I was finally leaving space for something to grow. Rachel was the first person to walk through the door. She brought a ficus and a bottle of sparkling cider. No alcohol until you land your second client, she said, handing me a glass. The first one's already on the books. I blinked. What? She grinned. You're looking at your first investor. And Maylene has a referral. Someone big. I stared at her. My lawyer, my neighbor, my unexpected ally. Rachel, why are you doing this? She didn't flinch. Because I know how it feels to be told you don't belong. And because people like you, we need to take up space, not ask for it. That afternoon, I moved my leather guest book to the front desk. I hadn't opened it since the wedding, but something about placing it there felt right. It wasn't a symbol of rejection anymore. It was the beginning. A week later, I met my first client. She was in her late 40s, wore a green linen dress, and introduced herself as Lila Cortez, a self-published memoirist from California who had driven across 2 states just for this meeting. I wanted to talk to you in person, she said, sitting across from me in the little studio that still smelled like paint. I nodded, ready with a portfolio and rate sheet. But she pulled out a folded magazine clipping and placed it gently on the table between us. It was from a local business journal, a short feature on new design studios in the Pacific Northwest. My name was bolded in the headline. She tapped it once. I came because of this, she said, and because of what you did. I tilted my head. She continued, her voice steady. I heard you refused to sell your designs to a family who didn't respect you, that you walked away even when it cost you money and reputation. That takes spine. I blinked. No one had said it that plainly before. She smiled. And I want to work with people who have a spine. We spent the next hour talking about her manuscript. It was raw, honest, a survival story about rebuilding her life after a public scandal. By the end, we'd agreed on a design direction, delivery dates, and a retainer. When she left, I sat at the window for a long time watching the street traffic. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about knowing what I was worth and acting like it. When I closed up that night, I didn't check my phone, didn't scroll social media, didn't wonder if Chelsea ever got the slideshow fixed or if Darren's marriage would last. They weren't mine to carry anymore. Instead, I flipped the sign on my door to closed, locked it, and whispered something into the quiet space. You were always here. You just stopped asking for permission. And for the first time in years, I walked home, not as someone's daughter or someone's sister, but as someone with a name on the door. A few weeks after my studio opened, I received a small envelope with no return address. The handwriting was precise, slanted slightly to the right. I recognized it instantly. Mei Lin. Inside was a folded note handwritten on thick cream paper. Elise, you probably don't expect to hear from me, and that's okay. I debated whether I should even send this, but in the end I felt I owed you something more than silence. The wedding went on, but it was not the wedding we had planned. Not really. After you left, we scrambled. The signs were wrong. The menus were incomplete. The guest book, of course, was gone. I tried to salvage what I could, but there was a gap I couldn't fill. Not just logistically, emotionally. The bride cried, the groom fumbled through his vows, and the mother of the groom. Let's just say she finally ran out of things to control. But that's not why I'm writing. I'm writing because I watched you walk away from something that was yours and still walk tall. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't demand. But you also didn't shrink. You taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn, that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's the strongest answer. Thank you. Mei Lin. I read the letter twice, then again. My fingers brushed the edge of the paper like it might vanish if I blinked too long. I didn't cry, but something inside me settled, like a chair finally pushed all the way in. Later that day, I went to the supply closet and pulled out an old frame I'd carried from apartment to apartment for years. It was wooden, slightly chipped at the corners, but still solid. Inside it was the watercolor I'd painted when I was 16. The house on Rosewood Lane, 2 floors, blue shutters, a porch swing that had been broken half my childhood but never taken down. I had painted it for my mom, quietly, carefully. I even remembered how I'd wrapped it with gold ribbon from her flower shop and a little tag that said, "For home." She'd never hung it, not then, not ever. It had lived in boxes leaned against bookshelves tucked behind other frames, like a forgotten postcard. But now it had a wall. And not just any wall, the front wall of Warren & Co., right behind my desk, where the morning light hit just right. I stood on a step stool to center it, stepped back, adjusted the angle, then stood there for a long time just looking. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time, it was exactly where it was meant to be. Clients came and went. Some noticed the painting, most didn't. But every time someone asked about it, I'd smile and say, "It's a house I used to think I had to earn my way back into." Now I didn't want to go back. Not because I was angry, but because I finally realized I didn't have to prove myself worthy of a place that never truly made room for me. Rachel once told me that healing doesn't always come with big declarations. Sometimes it's the quiet decisions, the ones no one claps for. Like hanging a painting, like not replying to an apology that comes too late, like choosing peace over proximity. As I locked up that night, I looked over my shoulder at the studio one last time before the lights went out. The painting on the wall, the ficus from Rachel, the little stack of thank you notes from clients who saw me, not just my work. And I thought, this is what a home looks like when you build it yourself. Not inherited, not borrowed, not begged for, chosen, placed, and earned by being exactly who you are. The envelope came on a Thursday. It was thick, the kind that usually held holiday cards or formal announcements. There was no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable, slanted slightly, overconfident, a little messy. Darren. I stared at it for a moment before opening it. Not because I expected anything earth-shattering, but because after everything I had learned to be careful with hope. Inside was a wedding photo. It had been taken at the reception. Chelsea was mid-laugh, her head tilted slightly toward Darren. He was smiling, not the practiced tight-lipped kind I'd seen at every family holiday for the last 10 years, but something real, natural. They looked happy. And on the table in front of them, slightly blurred but still recognizable, was one of the menu cards I had designed. Not the final print, the template, the unapproved draft, the one I'd created before everything fractured. I turned the photo over. On the back, in the same slanted writing, were 6 words. That menu made the photo perfect. No signature, no apology, no explanation, just that. I sat for a while, the photo resting in my lap. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the edges of the hardwood floor. Outside, someone was walking their dog, a little white terrier in a pink harness. It barked at a squirrel and then immediately regretted it. Inside, everything was still. I looked down again at the picture. It would have broken me once. That casual note, that half-sincere nod to something I had poured hours of my life into. Before I would have read it a dozen times, searching for deeper meaning, for proof that I mattered. But not now. Now I saw it for what it was, a gesture, maybe even a genuine one. A thread tossed across a canyon that neither of us was willing to bridge. And that was okay. I walked to the filing cabinet behind my desk and slid the photo into the top drawer. It rested beside Maylin's letter, a few early sketches, and a dried sprig of lavender from Rachel's first congratulatory bouquet. Then I walked to the kitchen corner of my studio and filled the kettle. It whistled low like a secret only I knew. I reached for my favorite mug, chipped slightly at the rim, the one with the painted fox curled in a bed of leaves, and poured the tea slowly, letting the steam kiss my face. I sat down by the window, pulled my knees up to the edge of the seat, and cradled the cup between my hands. Outside, the dog had won its standoff. The squirrel was gone. Peace returned to the sidewalk. I took a sip. The tea was warm, earthy, familiar. Like me. Once I thought I needed my family to complete my story. Now I knew better. I wasn't missing pieces. I was just beginning the part I would write myself. Every Thursday at 4:00 p.m., room 3C at the community center, filled with the sound of rustling sketchbooks, clicking pens, and the soft shuffle of teenage awkwardness. It was my favorite hour of the week. The high school design class had started small, just 6 students, mostly girls. Maylin had introduced me to the center director, who loved the idea of offering an art-based workshop for students who didn't fit into sports or debate clubs. I wasn't sure I'd be any good at teaching, but I said yes. It turned out I loved it. There was a quiet magic in watching them grow more confident with each layout, each brushstroke. I taught them basics: typography, composition, negative space. But sometimes the real lessons came through the pauses between projects. When a student lingered after class, when silence hung heavy after a failed attempt, and no one rushed to fill it. That Thursday, Nora stayed behind. She was 15, sharp as a tack, and guarded like a fortress. Her sleeves always covered her wrists, even in summer. She never raised her hand but submitted every assignment with brutal precision, clean, meticulous, a little sad. We were putting away supplies when she said, almost too softly to hear, "I like being here." I looked up from the table. "I like having you here," she shrugged. "Most adults pretend not to notice me. You don't." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. She hesitated, then added, "You're kind of like the mom I never really had." It hit harder than I expected. I set the box of markers down. Something in me shifted, not broken, just unlocked. "I'm not trying to replace her," I said gently. Nora met my eyes. "I know, that's why it matters." She left a few minutes later, her backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds already in. But the room didn't go quiet again. Her words lingered like warm light. For a long time, I thought family was something you had to be born into. That no matter how far I moved or how many years passed, I was still tethered to that same thread, the one woven through birthday cards, not sent dinners eaten in silence, and words that always seemed to arrive too late. But sitting in that empty classroom, I realized something else. Family is also a choice. It's in who shows up when you don't ask, who says your name without reshaping it into a weapon, who lets you be seen, not just noticed. Later that evening, I walked back to the studio. I unlocked the door, flicked on the lights, and took in the space I had built from the ground up. Clean walls, tall windows, shelves lined with sketches, samples, small gifts from clients who'd become friends. At the far end behind my desk hung the watercolor of the farmhouse Darren and I grew up in. I'd finally framed it last month, hung it myself, measuring each corner until it was perfectly aligned. It didn't hurt anymore to see it. That house had once meant longing. Now it meant proof that I had memory, that I had meaning, even if no one else held on to it. I stood there for a while, just breathing. Then I sat down, opened a fresh notebook, and began sketching the syllabus for next month's class. I titled the unit, Designing with Intention, and under it I wrote a simple sentence: we create what we were never given. Sometimes I still think about that day. Not the moment in front of the ballroom doors, not the part where my name wasn't on the list, or when my mother called me a stranger. I think about the few minutes after that, sitting alone on a low stone wall behind the venue near the garden arch wrapped in fairy lights. My dress pulled around my ankles. The leather-bound guestbook was no longer in my hands. I had left it behind. The air smelled faintly of roses and overcooked salmon. Somewhere inside a string quartet had just started playing canon in D. I remember my hands trembling a little, resting in my lap, like I didn't know what to do with them. I remember how loud the silence felt, even with all the music and laughter bleeding through the walls. For a moment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there suspended in that stillness and thought, this is what it feels like to be uninvited from your own story. But looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see then. I wasn't just uninvited. I was being released. Released from a table where I'd spent years trying to earn a seat. Released from bending myself into shapes that might fit someone else's mold of family. Released from the quiet desperation of wanting to be wanted. That night didn't break me. It reminded me that I was never supposed to beg for belonging. Today my hands still tremble sometimes, but it's when I'm cutting ribbon for a new client's launch party, or when I'm pinning up a student's design on the studio board. There's life in that motion, a pulse, a future. I no longer need a seat at someone else's table, because I built my own. And at that table, the names are handwritten with care. The place cards are intentional. The design isn't just elegant, it's honest. It tells a story, one that says, you matter. I see you. I'm glad you're here. The funny thing is, I never imagined I'd become the kind of woman who could create that space, not just for others, but for myself. But here I am. I keep a photo of that stone wall near my desk. It's not a dramatic shot, just a quiet capture from someone's phone, accidentally perfect. In it, I'm sitting alone, chin slightly lifted, the last light of evening casting a glow behind me. I used to think it showed a woman abandoned. Now I see a woman about to begin. There are still days when the ache catches me off guard. Not often, but sometimes. Like when I hear someone call their mother just to tell her about a new coffee shop. Or when I see a woman my age being pulled into a warm hug by a woman with silver hair and kind eyes. It doesn't sting the way it used to, but it still lingers soft and sharp, like the edge of a page I've turned too quickly. Because no matter how much I've healed, there's a quiet part of me that still wishes my mother could have loved me the way I needed. Not just in gestures, but in truth, in presence, in calling me her daughter, not a stranger. But I've come to understand something. She couldn't give what she didn't have. Maybe her love came with conditions because that's how she was taught to measure worth. Maybe she believed silence was strength and dismissal was control. Maybe her heart had rooms even she was afraid to enter. I used to think if I worked hard enough, loved long enough, I could reach her. That if I showed her enough beauty, she'd find room for me in her version of family. Now I know I don't have to wait anymore. Her approval isn't a prize I forgot to earn. It's just a door that was never mine to walk through. And somehow that truth is not bitter, it's freeing. To anyone listening right now, if you've ever been left off the list, if you've ever stood outside a room you helped build, if your name was forgotten by the people who were supposed to remember first, you're not alone. Sometimes walking away feels like failure, but it might be the first real choice you make for yourself. Because leaving isn't always the end. Sometimes it's the only way you finally see who you are, without the noise, without the begging, without the bending. And when you do, something incredible happens. You realize you don't have to fight for a seat anymore. You can build your own table, one that fits the fullness of who you are. One where you write the place cards. One where love doesn't ask you to shrink. I've made peace with the story I was written out of. because I'm finally living the one I chose to write. And to anyone out there quiet, tired, unsure, just know you're not a stranger to yourself. You've always belonged, especially to you. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Was it a quiet morning with the hum of your city outside the window? Or a late night when stories like this keep you company in the silence? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with care and gratitude. If Elise's journey spoke to something inside you, if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or uninvited, we hope this story reminded you. You don't have to wait for a seat. You can build your own table. Please consider subscribing, not just for more stories like this, but to be part of a community that believes in soft strength, quiet courage, and the power of choosing yourself. Thank you for being here with us. Wherever you are in the world, whatever season you're in, carry this story gently. And if today felt like a page from your own life, may tomorrow be the beginning of the chapter you write for yourself. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.